Assalamu alaikum, you're watching Views and News and I'm Faisal Rehman live from our Islamabad studios. Today we'll be talking about the US-Iran tensions. As we all know that despite there were millions and millions, we would say, of sanctions on Iran by the Western world, in particular by the United States of America. And as we all know that they withdrew from this P5+1 formula that was earlier settled when Obama was the President of United States of America. But now, despite the economic sanctions or otherwise, Iranians have been sanctioned again, and this time it is a very interesting sanction. The foreign minister Jawad Zarif, who is the spokesperson, who is the man, who is the voice of Iran, has been sanctioned now. Now, what exactly is that supposed to mean? We'll also be talking about that. But before that, the US claims that this man is actually saying what Ayatollah Khamenei wants to say, and now he has been sanctioned, and so that means that he won't be able to say whatever he has been earlier saying. Even if he says that, is going to be limited sort of a voice for only Iran and within Iran. But when somebody is sanctioned for that matter, whatever he says becomes null and void. Now, is this a correct statement? Now, that is something we'll be discussing in our program. Plus, the future of Iran and US relations. Are they heading towards a war? Or they're looking forward for some sort of negotiations? If negotiations, with whom? If Jawad Zarif is not in the frame, because this man is known to be one of the best negotiators in the world at the moment, and the way he has presented Iran in that P5+1 formula, that was remarkable, that even the people and the leaders of the Western world also believed in him and said that was the only win-win formula or a win-win situation or a win-win solution for all the parties. Now, having said that, the future course of action, things are pretty tense. The military and the naval assets are very much there as well. F-22, they have been flown to Qatar, and Iran seems to be under a lot of pressure. To talk about this, we have with us in our studio. On my right is Dr. Rifat Hussain Saab, Senior Strategic Analyst and an expert on the IR. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. And we also will be joined in by Jameel Ahmed Khan Saab, former ambassador from Karachi. Jameel Saab, thank you very much, sir, for taking out your time as well and to be a part of our program. Now, sir, first question, that is something very interesting, sir, because we haven't heard that any individual who is actually the foreign minister of any sovereign country has been sanctioned by a country like United States of America, and eventually they believe that he won't be heard anymore. Now, what exactly is that supposed to mean, sir? If this man gives a statement in Iran about something, will that be considered the voice of Iran, or that will be only limited to Jawad Zarif as far as the Western world is concerned? Your take, sir.
Well, I think it is unprecedented that the United States has taken this step to delegitimize Mr. Jawad Zarif as the spokesperson and as well as a representative of the Iranian government, and he is the serving foreign minister and everybody recognizes him, and he is the main architect of the GCPO and Iranian representation in that agreement, which was signed in 2015. But ever since Trump administration has come to power, so they have been trying to target it, and Trump described it as a lousy deal, and he said that we are going to scrap it, and finally, after 2 years, after winning the elections, within 1 year we know that the Americans have walked away from the deal, while the rest of the countries, which includes also Germany, China and France and the P5 countries, they are still trying to salvage the deal. But the Americans are putting pressure on Iran by raising certain issues which are not part of the GCPO framework. For example, they are saying that Iran should stop its missile developments, and there should be limitations on Iran's enrichment, and these are the conditions that the Americans think that if those conditions are not met, so we will not be able to play our part in it.
Then what about the role of IAEA, sir?
Well, the IAEA has said during several of its inspections that there is no evidence, direct evidence of the Iranian government trying to do something which violates the very spirit of the GCPO agreement. So, but the Americans are calling IAEA certification of the Iranian or the absence of any evidence that Iran has violated the agreement as a as something that has been made up by IAEA, and the American argument has been this is lousy deal and they would like to renegotiate it. So, which means that the original man, the original person or the main architect of this program was Jawad Zarif, and Americans want to delegitimize him. And I think, to the best of my knowledge, this is unprecedented that a sitting foreign minister of the country has been delegitimized in the sense that they are sanctioned him, which means that he cannot travel freely, and wherever he goes, he has to seek a visa, and that visa will be only restricted within the territory that will be determined by the US.
No diplomatic immunity for this man
No
anymore, sir?
no diplomatic immunity for this man, and I am told that one of the sanctions that the Americans have imposed is that even when he travels to the United Nations and a office in New York, so he cannot be moving out of the 6 blocks within which the New York
North, south, east, and west.
West. So, which means that and then of course Jawad Zarif has said in his Twitter message, since I do not have any property outside, my children.
It won't make any difference to him.
It won't make any difference.
So let's also hear Ambassador Saab, Jameel Ahmed Khan Saab, who's joined us from Karachi. Sir, let's see, according to the diplomatic norms, I mean, where do this particular statement from the USA stands, and let's see what happens after this. Assalamu alaikum, Jameel Saab.
Walaikum salam.
Sir, thank you very much for taking out your time and talking to us. Now, sir, I'm sure you must have been hearing what our guest, Dr. Rifat Hussain Saab, was saying earlier.
Absolutely.
When a person who is a serving, let's suppose, a foreign minister of any sovereign country, right, sir, whether it's blacklisted in FATF or otherwise, obviously that is a separate issue, but that man has earlier been a very successful story as far as negotiations are concerned. And certainly, one fine morning we hear that the United States of America has sanctioned this man. Now, what sort of immunity he has now, sir? His voice, will it matter only within the boundaries of Iran? Or will his statements also be loud and clear and would be meaningful and would be the actual voice of Iran heard abroad?
What is a statement would definitely be very meaningful for all the countries of the world. And if United Nations do not pay any heed to it, that's their problem, basically. But according to the Vienna Convention, he enjoys the immunity all over the world, unless that is those clauses are changed, to my best of understanding. And for the sanction, first we have to see under what law the U.S. has imposed this sanction. Basically, that is the Treasury Department, and within Treasury Department, it's known as the Office of Foreign Asset Control. So mainly that is related to the assets and the transactions and any interest of the foreign minister there. Again, coming back to his engagement, diplomatic engagement. First of all, let me tell you, he's known as one of the best diplomats of the world, and he has proved his mettle during the negotiation of
Indeed, sir, a very composed man, yes.
JCPOA. And now he's known as a delight of diplomatic dispensation, as a matter of fact, and very impressive person, very well respected among the cadre of the diplomats. Now, the EU has already announced today, that they are going to engage with Mr. Jawad Zarif, and they will continue their business with Mr. Jawad. To my best of understanding, the problem would only arise, which Mr. Jawad Zarif has himself clarified, that he doesn't have any financial asset there in the United States. So therefore, I don't think it would impact that much so far as the other part of the world is concerned. The other countries of the United Nations, the other members of the United Nations, so far as they are concerned, so long as the Geneva Convention is in practice. That's one. Second, so far as his attendance, which is going to be in September again, to this time the General Assembly attendance, well, that is the prerogative of the United States. They are the one they accord visa, and the United Nations, they request, as a matter of fact, to the United States, the American, for the grant of visa to all the participants under that. Basically, they write a letter to their State Department that so many guests are coming, but that those respective countries, they apply on the basis of that. Basically, so they can impose restriction on him. They can even deny visa, and United Nations can at the most make a statement against that decision, and nothing more than that. So other than that, to my best of understanding and knowledge, it's not really going to impact much. But yes, his movement to United States and the allies of United States, basically, they are not going to have the similar kind of engagement because of being allied to the United States. And European Union today has made that statement, but yeah.
All right. So another question for Dr. Rifat here. Dr. Saab, now whatever steps or measures he takes, whatever decision-making process he goes through, whatever documents he sign in Iran with other countries, for that matter, if there is a trade deal or something of that sort, sir, will that be also recognized by the international authorities?
Well, it should be. It should be. There is no law which says that a particular country or the laws of a particular country, when they are applied to the individual of another nation, and that country does not still recognizes him to be the representative, so they are free to sign any agreement, or the legal basis are there for him to sign the agreement, and the international community will respect that. As Ambassador Saab has already said, the EU has announced that they will continue to engage with him. So it will be very interesting if in the EU's engagement with Jawad Zarif, will there be any?
So when they have said that they will engage with him, whereas the Americans believe that they will not, because he is null and void now at the moment. So how will they sort out issues through negotiations, sir?
Well, the first of all,
are you looking at some sort of a replacement by the Iranians for Jawad Zarif?
No,
and if not, then?
No. But the American strategy is that they want to delegitimize him, they want to silence his voice by applying pressure on the Iranian government that you should appoint somebody else in his place, and we then would be willing to come back to the GCPO and renegotiate it. And Jawad Zarif has been absolutely critical. He said that I have spent more than 3 years trying to negotiate this agreement. I know each and every word.
Everything is on his fingertips.
And because of this, his extensive engagement, and by the time the agreement was signed in 2015, we all knew that the IE representative, the representative of all the countries, including that of the United States, they were full of praise for his diplomacy, for his diplomatic acumen, and his brilliance. So the Americans want to delegitimize him because he speaks for the office of the Mr. Hassan Rouhani, and he speaks for the office of Mr. Khamenei. So which means that the Americans have, by targeting him, Americans have made it very, very clear that they are not going to recognize this regime, and whatever business or legal business Mr. Jawad Zarif conducts with the outside world, it will have no legitimacy only in the eyes of the American law. But if you go by the international diplomatic practices, the problem of one country cannot deprive you of your international legitimacy. So, which means that as long as he respects, or as Ambassador Saab was saying, that it is quite possible. I think the Americans, the timing of it is also very interesting. That has come 1 month before the holding of the UN General Assembly session, in which Jawad Sharif was hoping to be able to convince the international community that why and present Pakistan's and present Iran's case. So by targeting him, the Americans have made sure, and I think that if as a follow-up, there could very well be that
This was the
that
ace man of Iran, sir.
that the Americans will not issue him the visa and thereby debar him from entering the United States.
In that particular case, then obviously if Iran is looking for a solution, that means that Iran is looking at some other person who's going to go and present the case of Iran. That means that technically they will accept it in a way.
And it also represents, in my judgment, a failure of American approach to coerce the Iranians and bring them to heel in terms of their interests. And the other most important implication is that it also marks the failure of the American diplomacy towards Iran. So which means that their posture towards Iran is going to get tougher and get hardened, and the purpose of these sanctions is to create some kind of a diplomatic standoff on top of the already tense relations that prevail between Washington
And now
and
one
Tehran.
important area is again coming to you, Ambassador Saab. Now the role of Europe is going to be very critical and very important. And post 31st October, wherever England stands, we'll have to see, but most likely that is going to be a divorce from the European Union. So role of UK is going to be pretty independent, sir. Whereas when you look at France and you look at Germany.
Well, if you go by the history of the UK, 99% cases they have been going with the United States as their strongest ally. So in any case, I think Iran, or for that matter, other countries who are associated with Iran, they are not expecting UK to in any case support that. But the question here is the international law. Under the international law, all the treaties which are signed have the protection of United Nations Charter. And if there is any particularly multilateral treaty or even bilateral treaty, the conversation which was going on a little while ago was about the legitimacy of what he signs, the Mr. Jawad Zarif. The legitimacy has been guaranteed. Any treaty or MOU or any kind of agreement that is guaranteed, as a matter of fact, by the United Nations Charter. So therefore, that question for other members of the United Nations is very clear that they are not going to really follow that. The only difficulty which comes in such sanctions, and which had happened even before, which was between 2012 and 2016, the financial aspect of it, because United States, they have their financial mechanism that is really a kind of it's a dependence of the financial system of the world. So therefore, the companies who want to engage with Iran, the countries who want to engage with Iran, they find a lot of difficulty in the transaction so far as the dollars are concerned. Even if they sign any agreement, for example, with Pakistan, and the Prime Minister of Pakistan has already mentioned that Pakistan would go for the water trade with Iran. There are other countries, China, India, Russia. They have already decided to have their water. They have already created a mechanism for the transfer of their proceeds of the trade, what they are going to have. So whether it's the currency swap or whatever. So what I wanted to the point which I wanted to make here is that those agreements between, for example, Russia and Iran, or China or Iran, for example, or India or Iran, or forthcoming agreement, if any, between Pakistan and Iran, if it does not have those transactions, those treaties would remain valid, or those MOUs or trade agreements would remain valid and would continue with that.
This is exactly what I was about to ask you, that from 1st of August onwards, any commitment made by the Foreign Office of Iran, any document signed, whether it's an agreement or it's an MOU for that matter, so that is not going to be I mean, that is going to be considered as legitimate, not illegitimate.
That's
Correct,
true,
sir?
and there is a
All right.
clause already. There is a
All
clause
right. All
already
right. Now, sir,
given it.
coming back to another very important area. Now, we have seen that the US naval vessels are there in the region, sir. They have their air force in the neighboring countries.
Correct.
They have sent us decent number of troops in those naval carriers and otherwise. A lot of people believe, sir, a lot of people even from your foreign office who have retired, who are retired ambassadors at the moment, so they believe that there is a probability that, let's suppose, if Trump decides to vacate his forces or he wants them to leave, let's suppose, Afghanistan in 12 months' time, his next target is going to be Iran. Now, let's suppose, sir, first option is obviously negotiations, but this kind of attitude by the Americans, it very clearly shows that their interest is not in negotiations. They're just trying to exert as much pressure as possible on Iran and then just bring them down on the knees and then sort of talk to them. And this is not going to happen. Do you
Um,
fear, do you fear any sort of a conflict, sir?
well, there are all the probabilities, and even Russia today has given a statement that the U.S. is heading towards a conflict with Iran, and this is what they are wanting. In fact, if we just focus ourselves as to what U.S. is desiring and what U.S. Has already pronounced after withdrawal from JCPOA. There are 3 points they have put across that if Iran is able to do those compliance of those 3 points, then U.S. is going to remove all the sanctions and going to have business as normal with Iran. And what are those 3 points? Point number 1, ceasing all uranium enrichment. Point number 2, cut proxy from all Middle East countries. Point number 3, restrict ballistic missiles. Now, none of these 3 points. First of all, Iran has never accepted that they are doing a proxy war in Middle Eastern countries. Number 2, ceasing all uranium enrichment. That is part of whatever is permitted in the JCPOA. That is the legitimate right of Iran to work with it. But at the same time, if Americans have withdrawn from that international multilateral agreement, then Iran can exercise its right of reverting back to whatever they were doing before this agreement. Now, European Union is pressing. Even China is trying to convince Iran. Russia is trying to convince Iran that, hold on, we are going to engage with the United States to revert back to the agreement, and which, of course, according to people like myself, according to the analysis of people like myself, it doesn't seem that United States is going to agree with it, particularly under the administration of the current incumbent, the President Obama. So in that case, these 3 points, and then Iran is in its legitimate right, because before after the agreement, Iran has already reduced its 98% of the stockpiles of uranium, and now they have only 300 kgs. But Iran has said that, okay, we are going to start from the last month, the 27th. They said that we are going to start our enrichment again to 6% and then to onward. And this is what Israel started making hue and cry, that Iran has once again started with the enrichment. Now, so this is becoming a very, very complex situation. The United States now has about 120,000 troops with all what you just enumerated, the warships and all the assets they are deploying in countries like Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, all these places, they have deployed their assets. So your question and the final concluding answer to your question very briefly is that there are all the probabilities the conflict can really go out of hand. And Iran has very clearly and candidly announced to the world that if there is anything, any missile fired, even today there is a statement if there is any missile fired towards Iran, Iran is going to respond to it. And there are not one, there are many news items which you can monitor that Iran has already positioned itself in various parts of the
Iran has
Middle Eastern.
positioned itself, and on top, Iran says that all the naval vessels present in that particular area in the Persian Gulf, I mean, they are well under their hit list, basically because they believe that their missiles have that kind of strength that they can destroy certain ships there as well. Now, Dr. Saab, another important area. A lot of people believe that Iran is not Afghanistan, Iran is not Iraq, so Americans will not dare to attack Iran. But you know the kind of person Donald Trump is, anything is possible for him, sir. If this man can say while sitting and talking to certain other senior and seasoned officials, he says, well, I was enjoying that interesting chocolate cake while I ordered this. Now, the point is, sir, that if he believes that life doesn't matter, forget about the 10 million he mentioned about Afghanistan, but even a single person. And he earlier also mentioned that, you know, we were ready to hit one of the Iranian bases, but at least we were calculating that about 150 people would be killed, so I said no to it. Now, the point is that the kind of firepower the Americans have, sir, they can practically engage Iran. But the ratio of casualties on the other side could also be pretty high, sir, because Iran is very close. What other options? For example, sir, if they keep on exerting pressure, obviously there is a limit to everything. What sort of a reaction do you see coming out of Iran, sir? Forget about these statements. What I mean is something tangible, something kinetic happening, sir.
Well, the possibility of Iranians being provoked by these American antics, these American sanctions, one after the other, and American withdrawal from the GCPO agreement is very low, in my judgment. The Iranians are going to give a very measured response to this latest attempt by the Americans to sanction Mr. Jawad Zarif, and they will wait for the Americans to make a mistake, because the Americans want to provoke the Iranians and thereby create an incident which will furnish or which will give them grounds to rally the rest of the world behind them for the ultimate use of force against Iran. But if any use of force against the Iranian targets takes place, then the Iranian will not only respond, but they will also hit back, which means that they can hit American naval assets, American ground assets, and
Sir, is it just a threat, or do you believe that they have the capability? Because I was reading an article, I'm not sure which missile was that, M117 or something of that sort, which they have actually acquired from China.
Yes.
Is that missile capable enough to hit those targets, sir?
Well, I think that no country should take the risk whether the other countries has a missile capability, and that's highly inaccurate. That's not.
Sir, if you remember when Kuwait was invaded by Iraq,
Yes.
and there were certain Scud missiles fired from Iraq on Saudi Arabian soil as well.
Yes, yes.
So the reaction, we all witnessed what happened, and I still remember that statement on CNN. Well, the skies of Baghdad are illuminating. If you remember, sir, that was the beginning, and we saw that destruction live on the television screens. Now, sir, that kind of a scenario, which is the worst case scenario, what is the probability of that?
Well, I think if the Americans hit Iranian targets, which means that there is a single strike.
I'm talking about calculated strikes, air strikes, or whatever.
And and I think if the Americans have decided to use force against Iran, it's not going to be restricted to only single strike, which means that they would like to engage in what is known as the crippling or the preemptive strike against Iran, which will, how would that be read by Tehran? Tehran is going.
Sir, they have already declared that, I'm forgetting the name of that, the brigade, sir, the ones who look after the president and all, as a terrorist
Yes,
organization.
yes.
Now, in order to say, well, this is a terrorist organization and they get the legitimized approach, and then they target them and start killing them.
But the important question, Faisal, is for us is that does the international community generally,
Iranian Revolutionary Guards, if I'm not wrong.
does the international
Revolutionary Guard.
community buy this argument? So, as long as international community is for against the use of force against the Americans, I do not think that even under the best of the circumstances, the Americans would be willing.
Can the Americans attack under the umbrella of NATO?
No, they cannot. But they have to get everybody on board, because when you describe, for example, a country to be a legitimate target of the use of force, then you either have to go to the UN Security Council.
Sir, Iraq was destroyed practically.
No.
Later on, the British Prime Minister had to openly admit that this was their mistake.
But
despite the fact that million people were on roads.
That's true. That's very much true. But Iranians are not Iraqis.
Sir, when we say this, that Iranians are not Iraqis, what is that supposed to mean? Iraq was one of the strong states. Saddam Hussein was a very powerful man, sir. He had all sorts of weapons. People were thinking that he even had chemical weapons, if you remember, sir.
But then again, that was the impression that was created.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
That was the concept.
But the critical factor in this case is going to be how the Saudis are going to react, and more importantly, would the Israelis be part of this American military campaign?
Now, so the statements coming from the Foreign Office of Saudi Arabia, we all know, sir, the man who practically is the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs is calling the shots there, correct, sir?
Yeah.
He's the right-hand man of the Crown Prince. Both are aggressive, both are young. And both have got a very straightforward and negative kind of an approach towards Iran, right, sir? As far as Israel is concerned, from day one, when this deal was signed, sir, the man who was opposing it was the Prime Minister of Israel, sir. Still opposing it. And he went to States, did not meet the President, had a long address there with the opposition leaders, and he was hailed and everybody clapped out there, sir.
But Faisal, one thing you must remember, that who is going to be the biggest beneficiary of the escalation of tensions between Iran and Washington? These are going to be the multinational corporations which are interested in jacking up the price of oil. So that's one set of actors. It has nothing to do with the interstate diplomacy. The second largest beneficiary is going to be the military industrial complex
Of United States of America.
which wants to sell its weapons, and already they have sold billions and billions of weapons.
$480 billion worth
Not
of
only
weapons to
Saudi Arabia and to the smaller country. So as long as there is no war, but there are escalation in tensions, so these people remain in business. And I think the Americans will be very, very stupid that, in the current scenario, when they are willing to withdraw their troops from a 17-year-long war in Afghanistan, they will not be prone to opening another front, which means that the consequences are going to be unpredictable. If Americans could be assured that the military option is on table and we can implement it, but the question is that one should not underestimate the Iranian retaliatory capability, and they can fire the newly acquired Chinese missiles by half a dozen, and in the direction of Tel Aviv, and that's the end of the story.
Sir, one quick comment, because I want this answer from you as well as from Ambassador Zah. Is it correct that in some sort of a charter or some sort of an agreement in USA, the Americans can practically use a tactical weapon and say that, well, we can use this because under these circumstances, this particular action is legitimized?
No. There is an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice where they have strongly discouraged the possibility of nuclear use by any country.
Correct.
And particularly when you are talking about tactical nuclear weapons, are you talking about the nukes? It's going to be horrendous. It will create such repercussions that the Americans cannot live with these consequences. The only time when Americans were able to use their atomic weapons was at the time during war against Japan on August
Sixth one.
in August 1945. But since then, they have threatened to use, but they have, when it comes to,
I mean, we have witnessed that, sir. They were almost at the brink of a nuclear war during the Cuban crisis.
yeah,
They were almost head on.
no, but I'm saying is that there have been many crises in which nuclear weapons were contemplated as the possibility of the threat of use during Korean War, during even the Vietnam War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the Americans never dared to push the trigger. So it will take an extraordinary, it will be an act of lunacy on the part of any American president to think of using tactical nuclear weapons, because the moment you break this nuclear taboo, then it's a free for all.
All right. Now, Ambassador Saab, if you remember when Mr. Donald Trump was addressing and was talking to the media in United States when the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan Saab, was sitting right next to him, he said a few things. He said, well, one option with me was to attack Afghanistan, and I promise, and he really emphasized on this, and he said that I could have cleared everyone there. We could have, in fact, removed Afghanistan from the surface of the earth, and we would have, but I never wanted that at the cost of 10 million people. Now, I mean, this you should not expect, and we do not expect, in fact, from the head of a state of any country, even from a smaller country. But coming from the US president, a statement like this means a lot. That what's brewing in his mind at the moment. And he seems to be trigger happy, though he said that, the nuclear weapons are different, but we're talking about the mother of all bombs. He, in fact, used it for the first time in Afghanistan, I remember, 2 years ago.
He did make a mention.
All right. And if you remember, sir, when he took charge, he ordered missile strikes on Syria. About 120 missiles were fired at that time, if you remember, sir. So
that's right.
I won't say that he is a super trigger happy man, but he doesn't even say no to it, sir.
We have to bear in mind a couple of things. As I've already indicated, number one, that Americans have the biggest and the highest budget of their defense forces. Right? It was $77 billion last year. It's now about 10% more, so about $100 billion budget they have, number one. So that's why, and from consistently over a period of last many decades, they have the highest firepower in the world. That is a recognizable fact because those facts and figures are available. The military facts and figures are available. Now, having that in mind, the president of the United States today, he is totally unprecedented, or for that matter, untraditional. Basically, he says things from the pedestal where he feels, or his team feels, that Americans, they are the super nation, and therefore they can take all these decisions. They have demonstrated it in Iraq, as in going unilaterally. They have demonstrated it with their allies going to Afghanistan, and under what circumstances. So firepower, this time in Iran also, they had zeroed in 3 targets, and those 3 targets were their missile bases of Iran. And Mike Pompeo had cleared it, as reported, and also John Bolton had cleared it, that yes, they should be done. But all of a sudden, the European Union and some other countries got involved in it.
John Bolton has been the architect of most of these wars fought by the Americans. I mean, this man believes in wars for some reason. John Bolton, sir. Anyway.
And the grounds, if you review last couple of weeks, what has happened, all those incidents of the alleged drone attack or attack on drone of the United States, and then the ship matter. And today's allegation is, Americans are blaming Iran of a blast which has taken place in Aden, Yemen, where about 12 military people have been killed. So they are blaming that Iran is. So they have enough material are grounds now, and they are creating, they are probably going to have more grounds to tell their allies. And mind you, if Iran is alleged to have fired even a single missile towards any of the allies who are deployed in the Gulf at this point in time, what to talk of the U.S., the NATO, within their own clauses of the treaty, one country attack or the asset of one country attack would be taken as an attack on all the countries, and it could retaliate. That treaty is already there, the multilateral treaty of NATO, and that has a cover of United Nations Chapter 8, and that comes under the regional organization. So they have that cover, and they could do that, and perhaps they are building that. So at this point in time, the only safety wall which I see is that the European Union is playing its role quite effectively, although feeling helpless in many respects. The Russians, the Chinese, they already have some bilateral agreements with Iran. And mind you, there is another multilateral agreement between Iran and there are about 10 other countries which is under the ECO. So there are the charter of ECO where other countries can join their hands and head together and try and pursue the United States not to do that. Coming back, the last point what you were discussing was about the missile. Missiles of the Iran, they have already declared, announced, and it is recognized that they can reach right up to Mediterranean Sea. So they have that capability. As against that, the latest deployment, which has taken place just about 2 weeks ago, or even less, in Saudi Arabia, are basically anti-missile deployment, and which is basically an iron curtain, which they are trying to lay against these threats. But Iran doesn't only rely on missiles only. Iran has their own components in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and in other countries also. And Americans, they have raised that element of fear that Iran can target the interest of Americans or their allies. So there are a lot of complicated heat
this
which
issue
is
is indeed very complicated, sir. There's no doubt about that. Last comment from you, Dr. Saab. What sort of a role do you see of Israel now, sir? Because they are just waiting for the moment to get after Iran, sir.
In fact, they are pressurizing.
Yeah. Now, sir, anything that can happen. If you remember, there were certain problems with certain oil tankers. Iran was blamed. Then the seizure of the ship, British ship, another issue. Then one of the claims made by the Iranians was that they have shot down an American drone, and the Americans said that we have also shot down their drone. Even the president said that they should look into the sea, at the bottom of the sea where they might find it. Because Iran cannot afford, and as they mentioned that if in case America is attacked or anything, what if, we always say that there are conspiracy theories, let's suppose CIA does it or Mossad does it at the cost of 10, 15 Marines. There is a possibility, sir. And then in the reaction, the Americans just go after them. Anything can happen. So situation is very fluid out there, right, sir?
Yes. But despite this fluidity, despite American efforts to manufacture a crisis which can be used as an argument to launch military operations against Iran, either singly or jointly with the help of the Israelis, my own sense is that the Americans realize that such a scenario is going to destabilize the region in a totally unpredictable way, and that unpredictability acts as a deterrent against the American ability to use force against Iran. However, there are, of course, the Iranians are not alone. They not only have the support of the neighboring states, but they can also play havoc by blocking the efforts for peace in Afghanistan. And the Iranians also maintain a very good, very healthy relationship, not only with Russia, but also with China.
But they won't jump in that sort of a war.
No. What we are saying is that these countries can play their role to convince the Americans that tensions do not serve anybody's interest, and the only way we can engage with Iran is by through a diplomatic negotiations.
Now, sir, in the Arabian Sea, if you let's assume for a moment that if you see the presence of the Chinese vessels as well as Russian vessels, just to neutralize the situation, can that escalate the situation?
Well, it depends. Who is going to challenge, or who strikes first? Iranians during all these
As a deterrence.
no, but yes, the American forces and the Chinese forces are there, but then the Chinese forces are also not in a position to directly become part of the conflict theater. So if it's going to be, it's in my judgment. Let's hope that does not
And Dr. Saab, last
that scenario does not transpire. But very quickly, Faisal, let's put it this way: that if it is going to be a fight, if it's going to be use of force, it's going to be Iran versus United States and Israel.
USA versus Iran, but US main allied, when you say the main partner, that is indeed Israel, sir, because a lot of people do believe that now they've developed these F-35s, F-21, the new versions of F-16s, a few new fighter bombers, and they always need to look at some sort of a country to attack and check out that. This is what they've done in Iraq. They have done that in Afghanistan, the bunker busters and all those bombs, if you remember, on Tora Bora and etc. Mother of all bombs as well, dropped for the first time. But let's see where it leads, sir. But I think there are a lot of more points we could have actually thrown light on, but because of the shortage of time, sir. Anyway, Dr. Thank you very much. Ambassador, it was a pleasure to have you too, sir. Thank you very much.
Likewise.
And that's all we have for this moment. I'll see you again. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.